You know I'm going to be looking that up.
They give like 4 different types of medications now. The bleeding.
Because they do have a high blood flow.
And I said I'm gonna look it up too because I was like I'm curious to figure out like what
I want to know
actually happened.
Which is leading us, okay, into our next chapter, because we're now moving into this circulatory system. Big system, all right? And when we look at this system, and like, you know, Kendall's talking about the bleeding, okay, and I'm definitely going to look up that hardening because I want to know, but that is something that can happen even as we age or if people are not metabolizing the calcium correctly. Now, Chapter 18, the circulatory system. We're going to find, we've got a couple of chapters that we're going to be looking at because we're going to break it down into this part of the system, which is the blood. We're going to look at the heart. We're going to look at the vessels. And so in looking at this portion of the system, do you guys remember studying this in Chapter 5, I think, and learning about how blood is a connective tissue? All right? If you remember, it's a connective tissue. It's fluid, which we can kind of see. And one of the things about connective tissue was dependent on the fibers of the body. You remember, like collagen, reticular, elastic, the 3 fibers. And because we now have this connective tissue fluid, okay, a fluid connective tissue, if you remember about connective tissue, you always had a matrix, all right? Now, one of the things about blood, we're going to be able to see that stuff gets dissolved, all right? And then we're going to see that we get to have parts that are whole and don't, okay? So blood is, I guess what you could say, a unique substance. This picture right here is showing us a red blood cell, all right, a white blood cell, and some platelets. Even though we think of this part of the circulatory system, and even though we're seeing that it is a connective tissue, as you know, we can't have those fibers in it because things would begin to get stuck all over the body, which is not good. But we're going to find that we're going to be able to have the ability to give rise to stuff like that. So the functions of this system, we're going to see that it contains the heart, the blood vessels, the blood. We're going to have a chapter on each, okay? The study of it, okay, is called hematology, huge area of science. What it needs to do, okay? We need to transport materials. We need to transport nutrients, waste, salts, proteins. We need to have a way to, if you think about the chapter that we just finished, the endocrine chapter, we got to have a way to transport those hormones, okay? We need it for protection, for antibodies, white blood cells, the parts of our immune system, okay? Platelets, clotting. We need it for regulation. Now, when we say regulation, buffers, if you think about pH of our bodies, pH is different in different areas. The blood is going to have the ability to help regulate the pHs of the body. Dissipates heat. We get too hot, that blood makes its way to capillary beds, which are near the skin surface, okay? And the heat gets to go, poof, but we sweat, okay? Fluid distribution of the body. We have to make sure the cells of the body that need this fluid can get it. Not every cell of the body is getting blood 24/7. More tissues will be active at different times. Yes, it is a liquid connective tissue. It contains full cells. Think about the red blood cell, for example. And we have an extracellular matrix. What do you guys remember about matrix from part 1?
It's like a mixture of stuff, right? Almost like a solution where everything's dissolved.
Well, let's stay with the mixture of stuff. Kristen?
Not a lot, right?
Kind of depending on how you look at it, because if you think about the semi-rigid connective tissue of the body, i.e. cartilage, okay? Cartilage doesn't have a blood supply, but it has connective tissues around it that help supply, okay? When you talked about connective tissue in part 1, all right, you were hopefully told that depending on the area of the body, that connective tissues could have a lot of extracellular matrix, i.e. like the hypodermis under the skin, where you've got good blood supply, but you've also got a bunch of fibers that are present, like the collagen, for example. You've got cells that are present, for example, like mast cells, white blood cells, phagocytes, stuff that's ready to help you fight if there's a breach to the outside environment. And the matrix. Hopefully, it was kind of described as something like, have you ever had some Jell-O somewhere and it didn't get eaten and it kind of started to melt and it kind of just looked like this big gooey mess, okay? That's sort of what the matrix is like under our skin, all right? We can have some of this connective tissue matrix around organs, but it's a little more fat-based, a lot of fat cells present. We can have the semi-rigid matrix, which is cartilage. The rigid matrix, which is bone. Is this ringing any bells now? Now, we're looking at the one that's liquid, the blood. So the matrix is that substance for allowing these little cells and pieces and water to exist. Okay? The difference now, this matrix can move. It can flow through the vessels. So, when we think about blood, what comes to your mind? The paper cut and you start bleeding and going about your day, right? Okay? And you probably think, that red stuff. All right? Have you ever thought, about the time it takes for it to clot and stop bleeding? Have you ever thought about it rushing all these little pieces to that area that's been breached? Okay? Because that means we've taken this inside environment, something has caused a breach to the outside environment, and it's rushing the white blood cells, it's rushing platelets there, it's got some chemicals going, it's doing everything it can to make sure the inside doesn't get hurt. Have you ever thought about that when you get cut? You will now. Okay? You know? I mean, I think about it every time. All right? And then, you know, if I see other people get the little cut, I'm like, you want me to explain to you what's happening? And I usually get that answer, no, that's okay. I'm good. I'm good. I'm like, come on, let me explain it to you. So, blood, we tend to think of that red substance. In our bodies, we'll have about 4 to 6 liters moving through the pump, which is the heart, and the vessels, okay, at any point in time. Our matrix for this connective tissue is plasma. It's a clear, light yellow fluid. I'll never forget my first job after my master's degree. Went to work in a lab that tested for levels of, you know how like you have these medicine trials, okay? And you tested for the levels of the chemicals in the person's plasma. So we got the plasma. And it would come to us, it'd be frozen, you'd have to let it thaw out, you'd have to begin testing it. And I'll never forget the time I spilled like a whole bottle of it all over my body. And I was thinking, because you don't know where it's coming from, what was in it, or anything like that. We weren't privy to that information. So definitely remember my first time with plasma. Now, formed elements, simply telling us that these are the parts that are staying whole. Okay? They're going to be whole within this liquid. So that would be our cells, such as red blood cells, white blood cells, and then those cell fragments, which we know as the platelets. Now, this, even though it's kind of, you know, cartoonish looking, this is representative of the cells that can be found in the blood. Now, does that mean that every single time that somebody looks at your blood, you're going to have every one of these cells? No. Okay? Because if we look at this picture, the red blood cells, we will begin, well, we'll call them RBCs, but their names are erythrocytes. This is because of the reference to how they're going to be formed. Okay? Platelets. Platelets are just simply tiny pieces. Platelets are not a complete cell. They are simply fragments. They carry in them clotting factors so that you don't lose too much blood in the hopes that they will try to stop the blood loss. The leukocytes, once again, because we're going to look at what this is in reference to how they're getting formed, okay? But these are the white blood cells, the WBCs, okay? There are 5 of them. Now, they are identified based upon what their nucleus looks like. A mature red blood cell does